All right, everybody, welcome to How to Help Your Child Navigate the Social Impacts of ADHD. My name is Rich Brancaccio. I'm a school psychologist and the founder and CEO here at Revibe Technologies. Thanks for joining us here today. Got several people still coming in, so we'll just take a moment before we get started. But I wanted to thank you for coming out. Quick background just on myself while we're allowing a few more folks to join. As I mentioned, I'm a former school psychologist. I worked for about 10 years, most of which were spent in the largest school system here in North Carolina, the Wake County Public School System. And then I retired, quote unquote, about 4 years ago to start Revibe, which is all about trying to help kids through technologies, through wearables, but also through just education, through sharing some things that parents can do, that teachers can do, that are very helpful for these children who we are on a mission to empower. So without further ado, we can get started here. See if we can go in a full screen presentation. Here we go. All right, and we will have some time at the end of the presentation to answer some questions. But what we're here today to discuss is how to help you as parents, teachers, educators, help kids with ADHD navigate the social impacts that they encounter every day and that they have to endure in school and in other social situations. So I want to start out by sharing with everybody that perhaps the most important person in the equation is you, is the adult in this child's life. And I would need you to go into the situation of helping your child to do better, to live better. I need you to go into that situation understanding that you are not alone. That perhaps, in my experience, when I was a school psychologist, is the most important thing to remember. When you first learn that your child struggles with something, particularly ADHD, or any focusing issues, it doesn't have to be labeled ADHD per se. But when you first understand and it's made clear to you, either through your observation or a teacher calls you or a family friend, parent of another child who your child's friends with, when someone tells you and you learn that, hey, my child has a struggle that not every child has to face, it's a very powerful moment in your life when you realize that you're going to have to go about things and handle things differently than maybe you had initially anticipated. And one of the feelings that you get early on as a parent is you can tend to feel kind of alone. You can feel kind of scared because this is something could be new to you, or it could be something maybe that you are having a flashback of from when you were younger. A lot of parents of children with ADHD or general focusing issues, it's not uncommon for parents to have had struggles themselves when they were younger. So some of the common things I would hear when I was a school psychologist was either I'm in uncharted territory, I feel incredibly alone, and I don't know how to tackle this journey. I feel ill-equipped, and it's something that's incredibly important because this is my baby. This is the most important person in my world. It's my child. So people tend to feel ill-prepared. They also, on the flip side, can feel this is deja vu. Oh my gosh, my child's going to have to endure what I endured when I was a child. It was incredibly difficult, and it can feel overwhelming. But the important thing to keep in mind is that you are not by yourself in this challenge, which is you can overcome. It is surmountable. So there are lots of other parents. There's at least 30 people here in this room today, just in this small internet gathering that we have together. There's 30 of us who have come together because we all feel similar challenges. And let's say 2 to 4 kids in every classroom in America struggle with focus and attention. So this is not something that you face by yourself. Sometimes it can be embarrassing. We'll get into this with some of the social aspects, which is why we're here today, but it can be embarrassing to get a phone call from your child's teacher or to get a text message when your child's out on a play date and you just kind of go, oh no, what's going on today? But think about the metric I just shared. We're seeing between 2 and 4 kids in every classroom across the country who are having similar challenges to your child. That means there are, between 2 and 4 sets of parents in your child's class who are having the same thoughts, the same worries, the same concerns that you have probably on a daily or at least a weekly basis for your child. So go into this knowing that You are not by yourself. This is not something you're facing alone. With that said, let's jump into this. Let's take a look at what we're doing. So why can social interactions be challenging for kids with ADHD? Why can making friends be hard? Well, there's a couple of reasons. There's a laundry list of things, but two that come to mind. Lower levels of dopamine, so there is a chemical difference between somebody with ADHD and without. There's also some differentiation in the way that the brain works. So the prefrontal cortex, which controls attention, concentration, working memory, gets less activity sometimes. You can think of it as it's less active for some of these kids. This can lead to things like poor impulse control, inability to read social cues or challenges to read social cues, and a lack of empathy. So what we'll see in terms of impulse control, we'll see kids with ADHD who are interrupting. They will say sometimes rude things. Not to say other people aren't thinking rude things, but sometimes they will say what they're thinking rather than passing it through their filter and then sending it back into their brain. It'll just come right out of their mouth. Again, it doesn't mean that these kids are more cruel or more rude or anything like that, but it means that sometimes they just are saying what the rest of us are probably thinking. We will see sometimes hitting and pushing and things like that. Again, it's an impulsive decision. It's oftentimes, it's not something that's premeditated. I'm not going to, if I'm a child with ADHD, I'm likely not saying, I think I'm going to hit Steven in the next few seconds. Boom, I've hit him. It's more like, Steven's bothering me. Oh, uh-oh, I just shoved him. I shouldn't have done that. That's what the thinking process looks like for kids with ADHD. In terms of a lack of empathy, it can come off like that because you'll get sometimes challenging cooperation, difficulties with group dynamic skills, delayed social maturity. And it's important to keep in mind when you think about poor cooperation, you'll also get sometimes things that are what are known as comorbid conditions. Fancy way of saying kind of when you see one, you likely will see the other one, or it's not unlikely to see the other one. And these can be things like oppositional defiant disorder, sometimes conduct disorder. But oppositional defiant disorder is just what it sounds like. Sometimes kids with ADHD are more likely to be oppositional and defiant. And again, it's not because they want to be difficult. It's not because they're looking to make trouble, although sometimes that's how it feels from the adult side of the table. If you're a parent or you're a teacher or you're a babysitter, this is how it can appear, but it's truthfully not the case in most cases. Then you have the inability to read social cues. Now, sometimes this will come from things, focusing challenges. If you have a focusing challenge related to, let's say, an autism spectrum disorder, that's something where there's a good chance you'll have a hard time reading social cues if you're on the autism spectrum. However, you can also have challenges picking up social cues if you have ADHD. In my own professional opinion, it's likely due to the fact of poor impulse control or impulsivity, whereas somebody else may be looking and reading cues and taking their time to really watch someone's facial expressions carefully. Somebody with ADHD may just look up, they're looking down, they're looking over here. They're not stopping to really look at cues or to look at cues in succession long enough to understand. So we're going to talk about what you can do in terms of helping kids with ADHD to try to improve some of these things. One thing to discuss right now before we forget is slowing down a little bit. If a child's teacher is throwing a couple of social cues in terms of a couple of disapproving faces, meaning the child's talking to someone else, or they're reading their Harry Potter book inside their desk, or they're doodling, the teacher may give them 3 to 5 facial expressions quickly. They may look at the child and kind of frown or make the eyebrows up like, uh-oh, watch out. But if the child's not looking or not consistently paying attention to the teacher, they're not going to see these things. So we'll get things like not knowing when to stop, invading personal space, reacting inappropriately. Something to mention about ADHD is a lot of these kids have a challenge when it comes to estimating things. They are historically poor estimators, meaning if you say, how long will this take? If it's something that they think they can do, oh, that's no problem. It'll take me a few minutes. Even adults, how long will it take to get across town? I'll be there in 10 minutes. When you are not really factoring in, well, there's traffic and there's red lights and there's all these other things that happen. So the same thing happens to children. They also are overestimators, which comes into some of the overreaction of, I have to do my homework. oh gosh, oh no, this is horrible. This is going to be terrible. The worst thing in the world. It's going to take me forever. They're in some cases, overreacting. Some cases it really will take forever. But in terms of overreaction, they'll view things that are hard as being overly challenging, more impossible than someone else may view or perceive it. So we're priming you guys to understand some of the suggestions we're going to make soon. So we want to give you some understanding as to why these kids have these challenges. One thing you'll notice, the more you learn about your child's struggles, the more empathetic you will become. And don't let guilt overtake you as a parent, as a mom or a dad or a grandparent or a teacher, because sometimes you'll learn more about your child's struggles and you'll go, oh my gosh, if only I realized that this is where that was coming from. I feel terrible now. I wasn't kind to my child when I reprimanded them, or I sent them to their room, or I spoke to them, in a mean way. And I wish I didn't do that. If I had realized that some of these things weren't intentional or weren't part of their character, but more part of their challenges, I would have approached it really differently. Do not beat yourselves up, moms and dads, teachers, grandparents. You only know what you know. And that's why you're doing things like this webcast today, because you're trying to learn more. So you can't feel guilty and beat yourself up over it. You just have to dust yourself off and say, let's move on from here. Let's move forward. I'm more educated. I'm more powerful. And I'm better able to understand my child and to help them. So don't get dragged down with things like that. Keep your eye forward. So moving forwards, speaking of moving forwards, teaching your child to control impulses. So interrupting. You can do kind of a no interruption training. You can practice asking your child to not interrupt a task. This is something where you can have fun with this. It shouldn't be punitive, but you can do something where we call it like red light, green light. You can have the child do something where they're going to want to chime in, and you can reward them. Hey, if you can not interrupt while I'm talking to your brother or your sister, this whole time you will get an X, or you get 3 chances, because no one's perfect. If you go beyond 3 chances, then you wouldn't get your prize. Try to make it positive and fun. You can teach your child to count to 5 before interjecting. There's a great example that I used to use when I was a psychologist in the school system. I used to tell my students who struggled with impulsivity, primarily from ADHD, I would tell them, look, your brain, your body, you are a lot like a high-speed sports car. You're like a Ferrari, but the world around you is not built for Ferraris, right? The typical classroom is not built for somebody who thinks and answers really quickly, who doesn't like to wait to be called on, who likes to sit in a seat, or who doesn't like to sit in a seat all day long. The classrooms are built generally in a structure for kids who are well-focused, who have good impulse control. And that's not how these children are built. So what I used to tell my students was, I would say, and this helps them understand and to feel not that they are diminished or that they're incapable, but it makes them feel empowered. I would say, you are like a Ferrari, but you are stuck in the traffic jam. It is no fun driving a Ferrari through Times Square. There's a lot of distractions and not a lot of space to stretch your legs and to run, open the car up a little bit. That's how a brain with ADHD is. A good friend of ours, Dr. Jim Poole, runs a pediatric practice that focuses on ADHD. And Dr. Poole's saying is, he calls it fast brain, because that's exactly what it is. You have a brain that runs fast, it works quickly. How do you harness your superpower is what Dr. Poole says, and I just love that. So here's some things you can try. You can use a nonverbal signal to encourage mindfulness without calling your child out. Teachers can do this. It's an age-old teacher trick, but you can do this yourself when you are at a friend's house, at a family member's house, you're at church, at a soccer game, wherever you may be. You can have a little nonverbal cue to remind your child to not blurt out or act impulsively. But teaching them to count to 5, let me backtrack one step, is important. Because oftentimes kids will just, as I said, immediately respond. So you can start with practice to train kids to say, before you blurt out or before you react on your emotion, count to 5 and then see if it's still a good idea. It's going to sound silly. They may challenge your suggestion, but it's really helpful, especially as kids get older. You can show the child some examples. You can take video of them doing something really well to show them, to combat their urge to say, I can't do it. I can't sit that long. I can't do this that long. You can take a video to show them, hey, look, you played whatever game it may be. You played this game or this puzzle, or you read this magazine for 15 minutes. Watch, I've got some video footage of it here. And that's what you'll get with kids with ADHD a lot. You'll get these really challenging statements that break your heart. They'll say things like, I can't do it. I'm dumb. I'm stupid. I'm the dumbest one in my class. Everybody else gets it except for me. I used to have a lot of kids tell me this when I would do psychoeducational assessment. I would give a child an IQ test. And they would tell me that they thought they were not smart. In reality, these kids are generally average to above average. It's just their inability to focus and get work done, or to listen, to take in the work in the first place, where the education in the first place is where they encounter challenges. So one more thing you can do, one or two more things, to emphasize the importance of saying hi and bye, especially for younger children, so kindergarten, first grade. It's something that can be perceived by others, by teachers, or by other kids as, oh, well, that's rude. You just walked in, sat down next to me, didn't say a word. Well, they're probably really focused on something, just not on some social things like you and I may be focused on. This is also a good thing to mention in terms of someone's ability to focus for a long time. I've heard a lot of parents say, my child doesn't have a focusing issue because they played Minecraft for 4 hours straight last night, so I know it's not ADHD. Or someone else will say that, you know, the other parent, whether you are a one parent or the other one, or whether you are a grandparent, or someone else who's a teacher says, well, that's not a problem, I've seen them do this. Kids with ADHD can hyper-focus. It is a superpower that must be harnessed and used for good, and not just to, you know, play video games all day. But it is helpful to show kids that they do have these superpowers. Encourage helpful fidgeting. This is something that we as a group are actually presenting a scientific paper on. Our data scientist here at Revibe and one of our partners in multi-health systems, the three of us are presenting a paper at the pediatric neuropsychology conference that's in Las Vegas coming up soon. So we'll be talking about our research from data we've learned from our users wearing Revibe on fidgeting, and how it can actually be really helpful to move and fidget more. So do encourage your child to move and do things that you're seeing as helpful types of fidgeting. Saying rude things. Don't respond with sarcasm or anger. It's very tempting, but explain how it made you feel, or how your child's other sibling, in a lot of cases, how it made them feel. Monitor playground behavior, and then role play later. Role playing works really well to do it both ways, to have your child reenact what they did and said, talk about why they could have been challenging from a friend perspective, and then have them flip roles, and then you can do it back to them so they can understand. I've had a lot of good success with this. You can also ask for a do-over. Remind your child to ask for a do-over. This is something that I've seen a lot of parents use with success, where instead of saying, you just did that, now you are going to your room, or you're in timeout, or you're grounded, they will simply say in a calm voice, okay. So if a child walks down the steps and says, I want this for dinner and I want it now, I'm hungry, they'll just say, okay, back up, go back up the steps, try it again. And a lot of times this helps save face for the child, and after a while, they'll start to pick up through learning in vivo. So it's really helpful instead of just yelling or getting punitive right away. Hitting, be empathetic. Try to solve the root problem of the outburst. So kids typically hit because they are frustrated and they go back to this kind of fight or flight mentality. But teaching kids to use their words, it sounds silly, but telling kids, giving them a couple of good words in their toolbox, such as, that really bothers me, or I'm very frustrated right now. Kids, a lot of times, if it sounds amazing, but they won't know the word for frustration. You know, they won't have the synonym in their mind to express frustration. So a lot of times they'll kind of go, boom, and they wind up hitting somebody. So give them some better tools than just using their hands or their feet, meaning give them some better words. I've seen flashcards with this. I've also seen some teachers who have done things like they've used like a little card they can keep in their desk. Maybe it's a yellow card or a red card. The yellow card means I'm getting really frustrated, and the red card is I'm really mad. I need to talk to somebody or take a quick break. So this is just giving kids a couple more outlets, right? If you're boiling water to make some tea, there's only one outlet, which is this one opening in the tea kettle. that's where all the frustration and the hot air is going to blow out of. So if you give them a couple other openings, meaning some other tools to express frustration, it'll vent in a much easier way than just squeaking or blurting out like the tea kettle does, which is similar to, a child hitting. When you are discussing, I was going to say reprimanding, but I don't love the word reprimanding. When you are correcting and helping your child better understand what they've just done, particularly if you're in a group setting, especially in a school or a field trip or a big family function, the best place for a learning experience is not in front of everybody. It's not when you're on stage and you're keyed up and they're keyed up. Remove yourself and others from the situation. Go to another quiet setting. Kneel down beside the child so that you are eye level. It's important. It conveys some mutual respect. And you may say, well, I don't have to convey that. I'm the grown up and they're the child. But if you want to position yourself for success, you will kneel down or sit down next to them so that you're eye level, because no one likes to be talked down upon. And it just makes for a much easier interaction to discuss what's going on. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, offer some other outlets for emotions. In terms of reading social cues, you can help identify the ways that your child gets into social difficulty, and you can talk about when they happen. It's really interesting when you start to ask a child pointed questions that will lead them to a discovery. It's incredibly powerful for you to do this. You will notice whether it's for social things or it's for other things around the house even, or things where they're just getting in general trouble at home. When you tell someone something, maybe you get a 10 or 20% uptake. And in my experience, when you have a child realize something organically, you will get more like a 70 or an 80% uptake, meaning you won't have to repeat yourself as much. It'll sink in when you lead them and you ask them 3 or 4 really good questions. Wait a moment, watch the gears turn, and then when they come up with that realization, they go, so I usually get in trouble whenever we're getting ready to do something really fun, and I'm excited to go out to recess. Oh, maybe I need to come up with a different way to get my excitement out, or maybe I need a quick warning before that happens to know in advance that something exciting is going to happen. So when you get kids to realize, that's incredibly powerful. Explain how to have kids look for clues of anger or annoyance. Again, some of these things will sound silly to you because as adults, we do this every day. But sometimes kids need explicit training. You can use things like social stories. A woman named Carol Gray is an author who has a lot of what she calls social stories, and they're wonderful for training kids to look for certain things in other people. And teaching general social functioning. But one of the things you can focus on is when someone's doing this, what do you think that means? Read your child a book. Look at any Berenstain Bears book. They have very descriptive drawings and illustrations in the book. The Little Critter books are terrific as well for younger kids to say, look at Daddy Critter's face. What do you think he's feeling right now? And they'll go, I don't know. Well, when you see someone's eyebrows do this or their hands are doing that, it means they're probably frustrated or they're confused. So teach kids explicitly. Again, it'll sound silly, but you will be very, very surprised what you can learn about your child in terms of what they actually don't understand that you assume they know. And that's why sometimes it's frustrating to parent a child with ADHD, because you assume, come on, my kid is fill in the blank. He or she's 9 years old, smart child. Of course they understand X, Y, and Z. But in reality, when you drill into it, a lot of times they actually don't. This is coming from a person who would sit with these kids in the school setting for years and years. And I would see this where these kids genuinely don't know everything that you assume they do. So find out about it. Learn what they don't know. You can ask your child's best friend to work with them in school. We used to call this a classroom buddy, somebody who's either very responsible, socially mature, could be one of their good friends, or just a child next to them who you know is kind of a class parent of a student, to help monitor that child for when they see them getting off task or they see them starting to be rude. They can quietly, respectfully chime in and just say, hey, remember we talked about the thing? If this happens, you might want to say this instead. Kids sometimes do better hearing suggestions from other kids. Sometimes they don't. You have to find out. In terms of teaching kids to express empathy, the best way is to demonstrate that yourself, right? Say thank you often. Remind kids to say please and thank you. Demonstrate good body language. Show kids how to help others. Give them good examples. And you can ask your kids to learn from their mistakes. No one's perfect. This is a learning process. Positively reinforce compassionate behavior. There's something that's really interesting because it sounds uber simple and super obvious, but it's not. Ask yourself tonight when you go home, when your kids go to sleep, how many times a day would I estimate that I give my child a direct, explicit compliment? How many times do I, quote, catch them being good? This is something that's really hard to do sometimes because we spend a lot of time focusing on what they're not doing well to try to teach them and improve things. But what gets overlooked, and I guarantee you are not alone, every parent, every teacher, every person in America and around the world does not generally give enough reinforcements positively. We don't catch them being good, but there's a lot of good research that says when you can catch these kids being good, you will get really good results, really great outcomes from rewarding the positive. So a strengths-based approach. Teaching your kids to express empathy. So we've seen kids, we all have seen kids in a group setting. One of my younger siblings, I remember when I was a child, my mom came home from school and said, I said, how did he do at school? And my brother, who had ADHD, back in first grade, my mom said, well, he was wearing his eyeglasses on the back of his head and turning around and making all the kids laugh. And then he got reprimanded in a group setting when I was there observing him during the parent observation day. Big group settings just really beckon challenges for kids with ADHD. So you have to really be on your best game. Teaching good social etiquette for group situations. My brother likely didn't know in first grade that it's not appropriate to make other kids laugh while the teacher is teaching. It's terrific when you're on the playground, but sometimes, again, it goes back to just teaching things that you assume that these kids already know. Brainstorm strategies for known triggers. We can all tell a couple of things about the kids that we know in our lives, what set them off. So identify new ones, help your child identify their own triggers and share some of these triggers with their siblings, with their teachers, with their babysitters. You can diffuse a lot of situations through knowledge and understanding. And you can fix a lot of things, right a lot of wrongs, if you will, by just helping the children to understand more about themselves. It's really powerful to have some introspection, especially when you're a child. Did you know this about yourself? No, I didn't know that about myself. Now, sometimes you'll realize that you may not be the best person to teach them. You may want to tap a resource like your school psychologist or your school counselor. It is amazing to me how, quote, never right parents can be in the eyes of their children, and how perpetually correct that their teachers or their school personnel are. My mom taught for 30-something years when we were kids, but she, in our eyes, didn't know anything about school. You don't know how to teach reading or math. You're not my teacher. And she was a teacher, but you're probably not alone if you felt this, where your children say, well, you don't know, you're not in school. So tap on a resource, get help from those who work with your kid. We are happy as school personnel to work with you. We're probably already trying to figure out ways to help children. So the more parent involvement we get, the better it works. We get a group together. We can help more, better, quicker when we work as a group between school and between home. So how do you help your child keep friends? This is something that is perhaps one of the most heartbreaking aspects of parenting, is when you see other people, particularly other children, who are not kind to your little one. It is incredibly damaging as a parent, and it breaks your heart. So how can you help your child to improve their friendship skills? The biggest thing we see is conflict resolution. How do you help resolve conflict, and how do you avoid future conflict? So some of the things that you can work on from this perspective are helping kids to, again, slow down, take a breath, count to 5 before they react, and then to give them a couple of go-to words. We can always tell when a child has been through some kind of a social skills training, when they say things that maybe are atypical of a typical third or fourth grader, let's say, or a first or second grader, when you hear someone say, that comment makes me feel really frustrated, I would immediately think to myself, someone's worked with this child before, that's terrific. Because that's not something that typically comes out of a young child's mouth. So giving them some of these tools that become with practice a go-to for them really helps to diffuse social challenges. And you'll see better outcomes for when they're working with their peers. So teaching kids to express empathy. You can look for some younger friends at first. If you're having a hard time getting play dates for your child, you can start with some younger kids, whether it's younger cousins or younger kids in the neighborhood, younger kids into preschool or kindergarten, whatever age group they may be in, because sometimes there's a silliness about kids and a delayed social maturity that we'll see in kids with focusing issues. And again, every child is unique. Sometimes they will be way advanced of their peers, but more commonly they're a little bit less mature than some of the kids in their grade level. You can also find special interest groups and clubs that have a common ground for your child. Have a picture of soccer here. It's a terrific opportunity. The other thing I highly recommend that a lot of people don't realize is, I will say most schools, particularly elementary school and some number of middle schools, and some high schools for that matter, but primarily elementary and middle school, have got what we call social skills groups. These are free. These are put on by your school counselor and or your school psychologist. If you haven't had your shoulder tapped to say, hey, would you be interested in having your little one join us? You can reach out, and odds are they'll say, yeah, we do lunch bunch or whatever fun name that each school calls it. We do that every Wednesday. Your child's welcome to come and join. And this is just where you have someone else teaching some of these social skills for you in a structured fashion with other kids. So I highly recommend doing that. In terms of tips for a better play date, we've seen good luck with this. Help explain your child's behavior to parents of the other child. And sometimes it's helpful, particularly for younger kids, if that parent explains some of the behaviors that they may encounter playing with your child before they get there. So that way it's not foreign to the child and they'll know what's going on. Let the guest decide the activity. This is something where it's important to practice teaching your little one to hand over the reins of the horse, if you will, to their play date. Kids with ADHD, a lot of times, because again, it's the impulsive part. All of us, whether we want to admit it or not as adults, if we want to engage with some friends of ours, typically we would love to do what we like to do, meaning us as an individual. If we have a good friend we love to spend time with and they really like to play checkers or chess, and we have fun doing that together, but we really, really like to go out and let's say we play golf or something like that. Whoever sets up the hangout or the play date will typically think to themselves, I really hope we can play golf because that's what I want to do with this person. But that person really loves playing chess. Kids are no different, but the difference with your child is they will verbalize it, whereas we as adults will generally keep it to ourselves or kind of work in some awkward social dance back and forth. So your little one will tell you very honestly, or their playmate, I don't want to do that. That's a bad idea. I don't want to do that. That's stupid. Again, it comes off as rude and it comes off as pushy or as demanding, but really that's generally not the intent from within the child's persona. They just want to do what's fun to them, and then whatever comes out is a byproduct of whatever they were thinking. We're not going to get into any id, ego, Freudian psychology here, but that's where a lot of this comes from, is their desire to get what they want, and their fast brain that just comes right from urge in their brain to verbalization out of their mouth. There's not a lot of downtime there. It's a great idea to have one child at a time as you kind of build up your child's ability to get along well with other kids. I've seen a lot of good things where you're mixing it up, where you're having let's say co-ed play dates. A lot of times parents for some reason will want to focus, well, my daughter, she'll play with other girls, or my son will play with other boys. I've seen really good outcomes from when you have boys and girls play together, particularly at younger ages. I think it's really helpful. So again, reach out to parents, be communicative so that you can continue to get play dates. If something happens, it's helpful to share, you know, maybe my child yelled at your child or lashed out or snatched a toy away and your child's very offended, or you as the parent are, you're very offended. I'm very sorry, but here's what happened. And here's what my child tends to do. Here's why. That can be very helpful in terms of people being more understanding and empathetic to, you know, your child's situation and some of their challenges. So those are some high level strategies, and more so wanted to focus on kind of where some of these behaviors and challenges come from, because the better you understand the etiology of the problem, the better you are equipped as a parent or a teacher to come through and help them solve it. So we'd love to hear any questions that you may have as guests here today, and we'll take a couple minutes for that. So let's see what we have from our chat window. All right. What are some ways we can combat this or strengthen relationship home with siblings? Perfect. So there are two questions right there. One question sounds like it's centering around siblings, and then one of the questions sounds like it's about their Revibe device. So with siblings, we've seen a lot of good success with educating the other siblings, older or younger, letting the other kids know that, you know, this child is going to do X, Y, or Z, and here's why. Can really be helpful in kind of disarming some of these back and forth explosive battles that kids will get into together. So it's important to educate, you know, to share within reason some of the things we talked about today with the other kids. And again, do some of the role playing. Get your children, get the siblings to role play together to realize, what can I do differently? Why did that hurt my sibling's feelings? Or maybe why did that physically hurt my sibling? Why did I do that? So when you can act some of these things out, it's really helpful. And what happens, almost like if you are used to exercising, you get muscle memory when you do something over and over again. This becomes muscle memory when you get angry, or when you push someone and you've done training after a while, you will immediately, either after it happens, you'll say, I'm sorry about that. Or before it happens, with time, you'll start to say things like, I'm really frustrated. I'm going to go talk to mom right now because I'm about to get really angry. So just practicing so it becomes routine is really important for siblings. In terms of getting your son to be as interactive as he can with his Revibe, what we like to focus on, there's a response rate score if you look at the Revibe, and that's what we focus on. So the more responsive that the child is to the vibrations, if they want to give feedback, they are able to tap back to give us a yes or a no for they were on task or off task. So the more that they respond, the higher their response rate is going to be. We also have a metric that's kind of kid-friendly. It's the first one, called the focus score. It's a general score that is heavily impacted or heavily improved the more responsive that they are. So the higher the response rate, the more focus points they will get. Somebody just asked us, how does Revibe monitor or record fidgets? Should they use Revibe during school hours or all the time? Great question. So I don't want to make the webinar just about Revibe. We're not here to push products, but I'm happy to answer questions. So ask whatever you'd like, but we're here to give a good general education for parents, but I'm happy to answer that question. So Revibe does monitor fidgets. It's one of our specialties, and one of the things we're presenting at the scientific conference is about our fidget tracking or fidget detection algorithms that we have. So yes, you can look at the fidgeting to see what days that they're more fidgety. If you put in your child's class schedule, you can look at what classes in particular, or what times of the day that they're the most fidgety. And then you can also look to see, is this fidgeting helpful? My child was really well focused. Their focus rate or their attention span was very high during this class, and their fidgeting was high. Aha, fidgeting's probably helping. Let me ask the teacher, what are they doing in your particular class? Okay, well, when he goes to art class, the art teacher actually put in a little bouncy band under the desk or some Velcro for him to play with that he's fidgeting on. Interesting, and it works well. Can we use that in other classes as well to drive the same outcome, which is more focus, improved on-task behavior? So that's how you can leverage fidgeting. And we do recommend that kids wear their Revibe during the school day, but a lot of people will also wear it after school to give you some more insights into, hey, you know, we've started to see that when my child gets more steps at nighttime, Revibe will tell you, if you tap on the bell icon on the top right-hand corner, you may get some insights that will tell you, did you know that when your child gets 5,000 steps between 5 p.m. and 8 p.m. on weekdays, their attention span is 5 minutes longer on average for the rest of the week, or they're 20% more focused for the rest of the next day. So yeah, it's the more they wear it, the more data we collect, the more we can help you to make some informed decisions about your child and give you some good input. Just reading through some more questions here. Let me scroll up. Let's see. I have a problem with a social skills group, but an online social skills group would be a good option. I've considered groups that are specific, so uses a platform like this. I think my answer is this. So this parent had asked the group here, what my personal take is on an online social skills group through a digital platform like Zoom, which we're on right now. And she cited that it's, you know, not optimal to have a digital interaction on a screen than in person. So I agree with that. I do think when possible, in person for anything is always better, but something is always better than nothing. So if your school doesn't have a social skills group, I would say absolutely. If I were you, I would certainly use an online social skills group, because just getting that training, allowing kids to see other kids are in this and that they are not alone, they are not the only ones, is important to me. And I think that's fruitful for children. So even explaining some of the things we talked about on this webinar today, I think are terrific in terms of helping your child understand that, hey, you are not alone. You are not the only child who struggles with focus or with being impulsive or with friends. Odds are there's between 2 and 4 kids in every class. Who else in your class did you see struggle? Oh yeah, he or she does struggle too. So just share the knowledge with your own child. Any tips on how to identify triggers when your child's overwhelmed and shuts down? Yes, you can do 2 things. One, you can ask your teacher or yourself or your child to start to jot down after they calm down. We call the cool down period as a teachable moment. When they're done cooling down, they're able to talk and chat again. When someone's just had a meltdown, big mistake, do not go up to the child and say, talk to me right now. Tell me what's going on. I want to talk about it. Wrong time. That's like when a police officer is pulling somebody over, you don't go up and ask for directions, right? There's a time and a place for everything. So let them cool down, talk to them when they're calm and cool, and you can ask them, hey, could you jot down what happened right before this? Now that's a good anecdotal solution for you or the teacher or the child to try to remember what's happening. But sometimes in the heat of the moment, no one's a terrific observer. There's something you can ask your school team to help you with. It's called the antecedent, the behavior and the consequence. So you would ask them to complete this observation where they're looking to see what is the antecedent, what is the behavior, and what is the consequence. So if you just mention, you know, ABC, they'll probably be familiar with that, where they're looking to see during these observations what's going on in the classroom, what's the antecedent, meaning what happened right before the event. That's A. B is what was the behavior itself, and then C, what was the consequence. And that can be helpful in terms of identifying triggers, because you have someone in the classroom doing observations during periods where you know maybe the child really struggles a lot in math. Let's get the school psychologist to go in during math. Hopefully we get to see one of those behaviors when the observer's in there. We have a mom of 3 boys, difficulty with teenage years. Many of these skills, is there an adaptation of these skills for teenagers, and does it get any better? It's challenging, respectfully interacting with adults and peers. Teresa, that's a great question. typically speaking, things with ADHD, in my experience, do tend to get better generally. Some percentage of kids, in my experience, about half, tend to start to outgrow some of the features of ADHD when they get, 17, 18, 19 years old. Some kids are before, some kids are later, and some kids will not grow out of these kinds of things. But I think it's important to have an adult conversation when kids get older, and to just share with them in a peer-to-peer type of thing. It's very tempting to still kind of talk to our children like they're our children, even though maybe they're have a beard and a mustache and they drive a big truck or something to their job every day now. They're still your child, but they're also a grown-up. So it's important for you to talk to them, and also to ask them good questions. That's the best way, especially when they're older, is to ask them questions that let them have self-realizations that go, oh my gosh, so when I did that behavior, my fill in the blank, my friend, my teacher, my boss, my girlfriend, my boyfriend, whoever it may be, that's why they reacted to that, and I'm seeing a pattern in myself. But you can lead a horse to water, but you can only get that horse to drink if they choose to. That's the best way, in my opinion. How can parents keep their calm when their kids triggers bad memory of the ADHD for parents? It's a great question. A lot of what we talked about, you can use, turn inwards to yourself, meaning before you react to your child who's getting into trouble for the, X hundredth time this week or this month, in your mind, you feel like I've, reprimanded, I've talked to my child like dozens and dozens of times a day, and they never listen, and they never hear me, and it never gets better. It's really frustrating. And the first thing that they taught us when I was in school to become a school psychologist was, it is okay to be frustrated. Kids are going to annoy you, and that is a part of life. It's a reality. Does it make you a bad psychologist? It doesn't make you a bad parent. It's just a natural reaction. It's how you choose to progress with that interaction that I think can potentially define more who you are the more that you learn. So what I mean by that is, once you learn some strategies, like before I respond to my child and yell at them or give them an emotional response, I should count to 5 or 10 myself. I should go write down on a Post-it note how I'm feeling right now and wait a few minutes, and then I'll talk to my child. It's kind of like the practice of when you get frustrated at a colleague, instead of sending them a nasty gram email, you write an email and you do not send it. You save it in drafts and you read it back to yourself later, and then you go, whoa, ouch, let me change this up a bit and reword that. Give yourself that opportunity as a parent. It's important. Got a lot of great questions here. Let me keep going through. Just gonna skim up a little bit. All right. We've got a question, getting the oldest to realize. How do you get the oldest to realize that it isn't all about them? Great question. These children, and again, I'm saying these kids and these individuals, there's a lot of similarities between people with ADHD, but there's also a lot of uniqueness and a lot of differences. So just because it's true for one person could be completely different for others. But a lot of times there is the perception from others that there's a self-centeredness around ADHD people. Again, this is my opinion. This is my thought on it. I believe a lot of this comes from the impulsivity. It takes a thoughtful person to remember to ask. When someone says, how are you doing? And you go, oh, I'm okay. I just lost my wallet, and my phone I just cracked my phone, dropped out of my pocket, and they'll tell you 3 or 4 things. And then when they're done, they move on. And the other person says to themselves, well, it would have been great if they asked me how I was doing. It's a really nice social nicety. But in reality, they impulsively just answered you. You asked them a question, they answered. And then in doing that, we'll see a lot of times people with ADHD have lower working memory and more difficulty with executive functioning, we call it. Google executive functioning later when you have free time, and read about executive functioning. It's a real challenge for people to keep things in front of mind and keep it in the mental plate, if you will. If you have a tray of food and you're a waiter or a waitress, your tray is smaller typically when you have ADHD to remember all these different things and keep them in your mind. So when they're done telling you about their phone and their wallet and what happened and why their day is not terrific, they've kind of forgotten that you actually asked a question and that they should have asked you how your day was because it just slipped their mind. So again, it's not that they're rude, but you know, it's just, this is how they are. Teresa said, boy, you nailed the description of my oldest. Haha. Thank you, Teresa. You know, this is something where I want you guys as parents to know and to understand, again, you are not alone. And it's not to take away from the uniqueness of everyone's child or student, but sometimes it's nice to not be as unique when being unique can be viewed as a challenge, right? If people view you as a troublemaker or a person who is rude or someone who doesn't care about other people, these things just aren't true. So it's helpful to know, hey, you're not the only one who struggles with these things. You know, you're in good company, whether it's the child or you're the parent, you're in good company with other parents who are great parents and they've taught their children things and they're good role models. But it takes a little bit of extra. It takes some overlearning, some over-teaching and overlearning with these kids. So let's keep going. We've got a bunch more questions and we have to break in just a couple minutes. I know we went over time, but we have, looks like the whole group has actually stayed with us, which is awesome. Impulse control for us parents. Good to remember that we often have ADHD too. Yes, it's challenging. And it's, sometimes, you know, two wrongs don't make a right. And sometimes two people with the same challenge can be very challenging to have them work together. That's why a lot of times, even there's a lot of interesting reading if you're into you know, your relationship as an adult with your significant other. It's challenging sometimes for adults who are married to an adult with ADHD. There's a challenge that comes with that too. Sometimes educating your significant other can be helpful to help them understand how your mind works and why you do certain things and why the bills are scattered all over the place and you're making a late payment. You know, these are things that happen. One person asked, how do you help kids to stop lying? So what I've seen in my personal interactions with kids are, now there's different, the genesis of lying comes from a couple different sources. I would say my belief is most commonly, these kids generally want to please, and their immediate gut reaction is to just say something that'll make the other person happy, that'll get them not in trouble. Again, I think you can combat that urge, especially if you know, if it's one of those situations where you as the parent, you know, the question you're asking is probably going to elicit an untrue response. Did you hit your sister? I would add on, did you hit your sister? And before you answer, I want you to think for a count of 5. I'm going to come back in 5 seconds, 10 seconds. And I want you to think about your answer and ask yourself, is that the best answer you can give me? Is it the truest answer that you have? Think about it and I'll come back. I would suspect for some of these kids that you would start to get some different answers when you force them to think. I've done this before as a school psychologist where I've said, for taking tests even with impulsivity, you are not allowed to hand in your test until you have waited at least 20 minutes or 30 minutes. You know, you have an hour to take this test. Do not get up out of that seat until the big hand is on, you know, the 3 or whatever it may be. You must take X amount of time because that forces kids to slow down and to, you know, go back over some of their answers and things like that. Difficulty interacting with other kids. I'm just going to answer a couple more real quick as we go through here. Difficulty with kids pick out other kids because they're not friends. Some kids pick them out of the crowd, make fun of them, realizing that they're being made fun. Let me just read that one more time. It tries to other kids that are not friends and kids. So it sounds like that question, I'm not sure if your child is picking out other kids or they're being picked out by other kids. But I think it's important to also help kids identify, particularly younger kids. These are good kids to be friends with, meaning that they're kind and they're accepting. And it's good to talk to the school when you have kids who are chronically not nice to your child, definitely bring that up, make it known, get that handled quickly. But a lot of times, for some strange reason, we can all think back to when we were kids, kids tend to gravitate towards kids who are unkind to them for some reason. The kids who are nice and sweet and accepting are seemingly like less desirable for kids sometimes. So it's important to help kids realize, hey, what is a good potential friend? Is a good friend somebody who's always, making you feel uncomfortable and saying, unkind things about you? Or is it a friend who's always looking to build you up? So just talking to kids and adapting that to their level of functioning. Let's see, my son has skills. There's a lot of questions here. Let's see. Time for one more, and then it's going to be 2 o'clock, and we have to sign off. The books I was discussing, the author's name was Carol Gray, and her books are Social Stories by Carol Gray. Once you read a couple of them, and they're terrific, you can actually start to make up your own on the fly. If you're in the car, you can tell some of these things, in the car without pictures. Seeing a correlation between ADHD problems and boys through puberty. That's a good question. Are we seeing anything in the preteen years that start to happen? I'm going to say yes. Middle school is. I worked at a middle school for a long time, years and years and years. Middle school for me was the most challenging age group of all, both for parents, for teachers, for the kids themselves, for school staff. Emotions are running high. The kids themselves are facing, adult-like challenges, issues, social things, but they're still children in most senses of the word. So it's really a hard time. And then having ADHD, I don't think helps with that, meaning the impulsivity, some of the challenges, that come with the social aspects of it. New social cliques and groups tend to form around that age period. I can't speak to the literature on that because I can't think of any to reference, but I can tell you from my experience, I don't know that there's a direct correlation where like it's exacerbated, or an earlier onset or something like that in kids with ADHD, but I can share, I could totally see where it becomes more challenging when you have issues surrounding ADHD and puberty. We'll share this. There's 1 or 2 good books that some folks have shared. I don't know if everybody can see what each other is saying. The Power of Different, The Link Between Disorder and Genius by Gail Saltz. So have read some of her things before, some of her materials. And then someone else shared that they read a book that said Raising Lions is very helpful for us. And there's a great book, again, by Dr. Poole. I'm gonna block on the title itself, but terrific read, terrific physician who specializes in ADHD. So thank you guys so much for joining. We will have this recording available for everyone who participated. And again, reach out to us. We're a company who wants to see these kids do well. So if you have any questions for us, again, I have experience as a school psychologist. Our staff here has a lot of experience actually just from preparing materials and content and webinars. So we have a really helpful team. Call us, email us, chat us up on our website. We're happy to help you guys. Our goal is to empower kids with focusing issues to be their greatest person through learning, through school, through social. So please let us know how we can be helpful for you guys. Someone says, thanks for the support. You're welcome. Thank you guys for everything you do as moms and dads and teachers. We wish you guys all the best. And we'll look for you guys in the future. We're going to do the webinars more often, and hopefully you guys found it helpful. Thanks again. You guys are the best. Hang in there. And remember, you are not alone. Thanks again. Have a great day.